Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to this Thursday's Let's Talk Dairy. So this morning I'm going to talk very briefly, I suppose depending on where you are in the country and how the weather has been and so forth in the last few days, you may or may not have silage cut. I suppose there has been quite a bit of silage cut in the last week or so, in spite of the tricky conditions. So big credit to the contractors that are out there that have gotten through an awful lot of ground in a very short space of time. And they've been really up against it this year because they've been late getting at it. So as I said, I suppose it might be a bit premature for some of you, but it's going to be bang on time for more of you. I'm just going to have a quick look at silage requirements or fertilizer requirements for second cut silage. And I'm also going to look at the silage in terms of surplus silage taken off the milking platforms as well. That's after taking place in the last few days as well. To a fairly significant proportion, and will be continuing to take place, I'd say, over the next number of weeks or so, given some of the growth rates that we've seen in the last few days as well. So it's finally come. I was promising it to you with a long time that we were going to get growth, and in many speakers, so Joseph Dunphy, John Douglas, we were all talking about growth coming, but it's actually finally come. So we've seen some very high growth rates. If you look on Twitter there, you see some Tim Casey in Cork Grassland Services is saying that he got 145. I saw another person with something like 150. I see one of our monitor farmers recorded 129 in the last week as well. So it emphasises two things, I suppose, that we need to walk farms regularly to try and stay on top of grass, because even in high stocking rate situations, growth rates of 129 are going to, or in the hundreds, are going to lead to surpluses developing very quickly, and then trying to take those surpluses out in the challenging weather conditions, I suppose, that we might have at the moment as well. So I suppose trying to spot them early and get them out as quickly as possible is going to be an important factor in trying to stay on top of grass. And to be fair, I think grass quality, and no matter how good a grassland manager people aren't, grass quality has been very tricky in the last couple of days or in the last couple of weeks. And any of you that are on grass groups with John Maher and the Grass 10 team will know that there's significant issues in terms of trying to stay on top of grass at the moment, no matter what you've been trying to do. So as I said, I'm just going to very quick on fertilizer for second cut. So our first cut is done, and that's the one that really has to be big demand for nutrient in particular. The second cut obviously should be, well, the first cut in particular now has been quite large, especially where they've come off late, where they've been a couple of weeks later. There's big bulky crops coming off, so they're going to have higher offtakes, so they do need to be replaced. And in reality, ideally, it's probably something that's not all that palatable to a lot of people. We should be trying to recycle slurry onto the silage ground. So as we've increased in herd sizes in the last number of years, obviously silage has moved off the platform in terms of long-term silage. In a lot of cases, means it's moved to out blocks, and the temptation is not to spread the slurry, not to carry the slurry there. But obviously, in terms of the whole nutrient cycle that we look at on an ongoing basis, and in particular in relation to K fertilizer, slurry or silage is very, very hard on K, and it needs to be replaced. And I suppose cattle slurry is well balanced fertilizer in terms of replenishing the K value on silage ground where it goes back to the silage ground. So it's important to factor that in. I suppose one thing that I always say in relation to that is slurry is going to have to be spread anyway. If you're spreading it yourself, obviously there's a time factor involved in maybe carting it to an outside block. Whereas in terms of, sometimes people are saying about the contractor cost and so forth, contractor cost and the fact that you have to replace that P&K value of the slurry at some point along the way with chemical fertilizer potentially means that the trade-off in terms of cost is not as significant as people may think. So in order to fertilize the crop right, and I'll just point out that these figures are in kgs per hectare as opposed to units per acre. So to get these into units per acre, we're multiplying it by 0.8. So the first figure here is 24, second one here is 16, and the third one here is 8. And then for the K side of things, we're looking at 56 units on an index 1 soil, 5/8, 40 units on an index 2, and somewhere in the region of 3 is 24 and 5/8, so in around 28 units of K on the index 3. So, and 100 kgs of nitrogen per hectare then is what's required. So that's 80 units of nitrogen that's required. And I think that from my experience talking to groups, in particular last year, I did a lot of Zoom calls, obviously around this time last year, because of were in the midst of the lockdown at the time, and there appeared to be quite high levels of fertilizer, nitrogen in particular, being applied for silage crops, both first and second cut. So when we talk about trying to reduce nitrogen levels, I think there's good scope there to actually cut back on nitrogen levels being applied for second cut, or for all silage cuts, to be honest. I think we're probably inclined to overdo it, with the idea that we're going to drive this greater, bigger, bulkier crop, when in reality, going with the correct rates, so the 100 units for first cut, including your slurry, and 80 units for your second cut, including your slurry, are going to provide plenty in terms of adequate supply of silage, and also in terms of quality. Too much nitrogen is actually a bad thing from a silage point of view, obviously from the point of view that it can cause crops to lodge, etc., as well as delaying cutting date then, which can impact on quality as well. So 80 units of nitrogen fertilizer is going to be more than enough for your silage crop for second cut. Okay, so I suppose it may be that it's unlikely, but it may be the case that there isn't fertilizer or slurry available on farms to go back to second cut ground, or for second cut. More likely that that's going to run out following the second cut, and that there won't be anything available to cover the ground after the second cut. But in reality, there should be slurry on most farms, and that should be recycled to the silage ground in order to maximize the return from nutrients. Because again, where ground is grazed, and we'll be talking about it in a second now in terms of surplus bales, but where ground is grazed, a huge proportion, actually in fact nearly 90% of the hay that the cow consumes in the form of grass is recycled back onto the ground. So applying more slurry than is needed onto grazing platforms is counterproductive, and obviously there's a cost associated with then trying to correct the soil fertility on the silage ground. So the opportunity is there to use the slurry. As I said, this whole concept of the circular economy that we're talking about, or we hear talk about, it's no different in a silage situation, that we're trying to send our nutrients back to where they came from, and that's going to be to the silage ground. So first and foremost, we should be trying to send the slurry back. That's going to cover your P and K requirements for the most part. What's in the slurry, I suppose, the watery slurry is going to be in the region of kind of your 6 units of P and your 30 units of K. Now that can vary very significantly, and I think I may have said that there on previous webinars about the variation that we've seen in some slurry that we've been testing. We've tested it. One of the lads did a little project there where he got a lot of slurry samples tested, and we've seen huge variation in both the P and K and the nitrogen level, in spite of the consistency of it. So we would assume that you're talking about 6 to 8% dry matter slurry when you're talking about thick slurry, and that the nutrient content of that is going to be in the region of 5 units of nitrogen, 5 to 6 units of P, and 30 odd units of K generally. But as I said, with the testing that we've done there over the past winter, we've seen quite significant variation around that as well. So might be worth looking into testing slurry in the future if you haven't done it before. So just to then on the K side of things, as I said, that's going to vary as well. So I suppose if we were using our 7% dry matter slurry, we're going to have a situation where we have a small bit of nitrogen because there's less nitrogen available, even with dribble bar and so forth, from slurry at this stage of the year. But your P and K is going to be consistent. So if you have good quality thick slurry, then you are going to have 5 to 6 units of P and 30 odd units of K in that per 1,000 gallons. And as you can see there, with the highest requirement for K being your 56 units on your index 1 soil, 1.5 to 2,000 gallons of slurry is probably going to be adequate to cover you from a K point of view. And then from the P point of view there, say when you're looking at maybe index 1 needing 21, needing 24, you're going to be maybe needing to top that up a little bit potentially. Now again, allowances have to be factored in here, and in particular for P, there's no concern in relation to K. You're not limited in that. So we may need to balance that up, and probably need to look at the P's and the K's on their own, as opposed to trying to maybe get the one fertilizer that's going to do all kind of scenario. So it's important that we get that right. We're fertilizing the crop. The figures here are to give back to the crop, or put into the crop what it's going to bring out in terms of yield. And then any balancing or improving of indexes that we're looking to do will take place after that. And slurry may have a role to play in that as well. As I said, if we have slurry available following the second cut, that can be used to improve the soil indexes, and then we may have to follow with the likes of muriate of potash or something like that, and maybe O730 depending on the P status of the ground if we're trying to build P indexes. And again, I'm very conscious of recommending the likes of O730 or O1020 or anything like that. People need to consult with their advisors in relation to allowances around P to avoid breaching regulations there. As I said, K isn't as big an issue. So I suppose one thing that isn't on the chart here is the sulfur requirement. It's something that we have to factor in as well. We need sulfur for all cuts, not just for first cut, and obviously grazing ground throughout the season as well. So the sulfur requirement is generally kind of 15 to 16 units of sulfur for all cuts, so first cut or second cut. So a very useful product in that sense there is if we use our slurry to deal with our P and K. There's a product out there, I think it's nearly available from all the companies now at this stage, or an equivalent of it, 38.00 plus 7.5 sulfur. So that's a protected urea product, which is obviously an advantage from the point of view of the environmental aspect. So you're using your protected urea, which is a good thing. From a logistical point of view, 2 bags of it go a long way to meeting your 80 units, which it will do the trick basically. If you've 2 bags of 38.00, you're putting out 76 units, and you're going to have a small little bit of nitrogen from the slurry that's applied as well. So you're going to be on the money in terms of the N requirement there as well. So don't forget sulfur. It's important for both nitrogen use efficiency and for also for protein development in the silage as well. So it has a role to play. So just moving on then to the surplus bales, I suppose, and there's been a good lot of them taken out in the last couple of weeks, as I said, and there will be more to come out over the next week or fortnight in terms of trying to correct grassland management issues that have arisen due to the way the spring has been. So just, I suppose, your typical bale, as you can see there in the picture, we say it's kind of 200 kgs of dry matter generally. They contain 1.6 units of P and 10 units of K. And again, now the K is the important aspect here in particular, because of the fact that there's no recycling of K taking place when you remove the silage in the form of the bale, unlike the scenario with the K when grazing takes place. As I said, 90% of it is recycled. So a quick rule of thumb there for you. Again, the slurry is the advantage here. For every 3 to 4 bales per acre that comes off, 1,000 gallons of good quality thick slurry or 2,000 gallons of watery slurry will need to be applied. So that's going to replenish your soil in terms of the offtake of nutrient that you have removed in the form of the bale. So just quickly, before bales are removed from the paddock, count up how many bales are in there. So divide it by the number of acres in the paddock, see how many bales per acre. I suppose in a lot of cases, we probably see 4, 5, 6 bales per acre sometimes coming off. So in that kind of a scenario, we're going to be looking at 1,000 to 1,500 gallons per acre going on to replace the offtake there. It doesn't have to happen straight after the silage comes off, but I think it's probably a good practice because obviously you don't have the complication of maybe dirtying any bit of grass, even though trailing shoe and dribble bars obviously get over that complication quite significantly. And the other thing is, I suppose, unless you're going to mark it up somewhere that you really are going to refer to some form of a guide that you will make sure that you get the slurry back there, the best time is to do it when the ground is just freshly cut in order to make sure that it gets done. So I suppose that's the P and K element of it, I suppose. And there's just one question there. What about using slurry for reseeding and when to put it out? Yeah, I suppose, Russell, that's a good question. It's a tricky one in that obviously you're trying to operate in a dry, fluffy seed bed for silage or for reseeding. So slurry would probably have to be applied in advance of any tilling taking place and given a chance to dry into the soil, I suppose, and then be tilled in. So I suppose you could apply it onto burnt off ground that's been cleaned off, give it a day or two to dry in, and then till after that. So it will do a share of your P and K requirement there. Unfortunately, the one catch with it, I suppose, is that it's a little bit slower release than the likes of your 10-10-20. So your 10-10-20 is available very readily, obviously, because it can dissolve there at ground level and be available at the level where the root is going to be developing in the new seedling. whereas the slurry is probably a little bit slower release type P&K. Now, it's a challenge that we have on farms, and we probably haven't come up with a suitable solution for it really as yet in relation to the lack of P allowances in particular on farms in derogation and so forth. So that instant P shot may not always be available, and I suppose applying the slurry as near as possible to the time of tilling and tilling it in such a way that it's staying very close to the surface is as good as you can do in that scenario. So final thing then, I suppose, and we'll wrap it up with that then, as I said, I wasn't going to be long today, is lime. So this is one of the cheapest fertilizers that you can buy. I suppose the challenge is that we're often looking to try to find a number of acres to deal with a load, which is generally going to be 20 or 25 tons. So in most cases, we're probably looking at applying somewhere in the region of maybe 2 tons to the acre or so. So we're looking for 12 or 13 acres to be available at any one time. I suppose, why am I saying this? Even just after first cut, people can sometimes rotate first cuts. As I said, those people with silage ground on out blocks probably don't tend to do that, obviously, because they don't have that opportunity. But there are people maybe that have silage ground on their milking block, and they may rotate the second cut. They take the second cut from a different area. So the first cut ground may be available for lime. And it's an important opportunity to take to get the lime out. I suppose in terms of the slurry before the lime and the lime before the slurry, this question always comes up. I think the objective would be to put out the slurry first and then the lime afterwards in order to avoid any release of nitrogen from that. P&K won't change with the application of lime, but we don't want to be releasing nitrogen into the air. So we should be trying to apply the slurry before the limes. And generally, at a very minimum, we're talking about leaving 3 to 4 days between the applications of all of these. So if we are going with slurry, we give it 3 or 4 days, then we can apply our lime. And then after that, we can apply our fertilizer again, another 3 to 4 days after that again. Or maybe you could come in with the lime after the fertilizer. But I suppose the key component would be in relation to the slurry, because our protected ureas are okay in terms of application with lime, whereas our slurry, if it's applied post-lime, the nitrogen will be dissipated into the air, and we don't want that. Both from the point of view of the environmental aspect of it, but also the loss of the nitrogen that's associated with it. But again, just to reiterate, the P&K value of it isn't going to be affected by the lime application. So if you're working with your thick slurry and you've got 5 units of P and 30 units of K in it, that's not going to be affected by lime. So I suppose just to factor it in, and again with the surplus paddocks as well, there may be opportunities to apply lime there. For people that have those taken out as well. And it's just to take the opportunity while the weather is only mediocre, I suppose, and ground conditions are okay-ish. They could be better for definite. But the opportunities are there now over the next month or so in particular for doing these applications, rather than putting it on the long finger with a view to doing it maybe later in the year when rotation length is increasing and so forth. But ground conditions can become a little bit more challenging as well. So I think it's something that people should be looking at. So I suppose just check the questions there. Yeah, just the protected urea after the lime application is okay. And is it okay to apply slurry directly after reseeding, or how long would you wait before applying? Yeah, I don't think I'd probably be inclined to apply slurry post reseeding, because obviously you have a soft seed bed, you want to be going with very light loads. I think I would prefer to be getting my grass established, getting it grazed, and then coming back maybe after a grazing with an application of slurry if you really wanted to do that. So I suppose just to summarize, first cuts, quite heavy first cuts after being taken off in a lot of cases where they have been done, and they're probably being done at the moment, even in other places as well. So we have to replace the nutrient that's been removed. Bear in mind that when we don't graze, we're stripping that nutrient away from that area and taking it obviously into the farmyard in the form of silage. If it's not been brought back in the form of slurry, then we're really depleting that soil in terms of K in particular, and also to a lesser extent P. Slurry is very balanced. Cattle slurry is very balanced in that sense, in terms of it will replace what comes off. So it's good to recycle that to the silage ground. And it's also going to mean that you're kind of more balanced fertilizer application for your silage crop for your second cut. So that should give you a good second cut as well. In terms of the nitrogen application, no need to have more than 80 units of nitrogen, including your slurry going out on second cut. Anything more is really wasting nitrogen and isn't going to generally generate much more for you. You may want to save a little bit more. If we're putting out 80 units, that means 40 days. 40 days is roughly 6 weeks. 6 weeks from the 1st of June is going to be in the middle of July cutting. That means that there's going to be nitrogen going on for either possibly a third cut potentially, or for subsequent grazings on the silage ground, depending on what your farming system is. So you need to be saving a little bit of nitrogen in that sense as well. If you apply the nitrogen regulations across the silage ground and everything, it means that you can't afford to be lashing out high quantities of nitrogen onto silage ground to drive on crops that actually don't materialize in reality or can be detrimental to the crop, as I said, in the form of lodging and so forth as well. So get our P&K right, yeah, ideally through slurry first, and then maybe balance up with fertilizer if needs be. Nitrogen application, no more than 80 units required. Don't forget the sulfur, need 15 to 16 units of that going on in order to get efficiency from the nitrogen, and also to allow for protein development in the grass as well. And then the final 2 points then relate to, firstly, I'll go to the lime because that applies to all ground. So if your pH is low, in terms of nitrogen use efficiency for any nitrogen fertilizer that you're putting out, or even P&K, to be honest, as well, from work that we've seen done by David Wall and Johnstone Castle as well, the value of applying lime cannot be underestimated, and we just probably don't do enough. Previous generations that went before us had greater emphasis on lime than we do now, and we actually are probably farming, or we are definitely farming at a higher intensity than they were back then. So the lime cannot be overstated. The opportunities are there now at this time of the year to be trying to pick off areas that need to be limed. And then the final thing, I suppose, is in relation to the surplus bales, that we should be trying to, again, it's that removal piece. It's not being recycled, so it needs to be recycled by returning slurry to the area. At a very minimum, needs to be earmarked to get slurry at some point later on in the year. But ideally, as I said, bird in the hand is worth two in the bush as such. So if we've it done now, it's a job ticked off straight away. So we can go into our clean silage aftermaths, apply our slurry with our low emission slurry spreading technology, grow back our grass for grazing and move on. And we don't have to be trying to think of going back there again. So that's it pretty much for today. I suppose we'll be back again next week. I hope to have Micheál O'Leary if he's available. There's a new fertilizer planner piece to the PBI that I'm hoping to get him to have a chat to us about. We'll see you all next week. In the meantime, take care and enjoy the easing of restrictions that's coming, but try to be safe on an ongoing basis, obviously, as well. And we wish you well for the week. Okay, thanks very much. Bye for now.